Hey everyone, Scott Sambucci here. It's getting everyone logged in and ready to go. I see that we are recording already. So what I'm going to do is get my screen share all set up, get some slides ready to rock and roll, and we'll get started here in just a minute. I know we've got a lot of people logging in, planning to join. Excited to see everyone here. Karina and Per, good to see you. Irving is here as well. I see. Who else do I see? Get back to my screen share. Here we go. Cool. Awesome. A lot of people logging in. We're going to start in just a minute or two. So just give me a second to make sure we've got everything all figured out here on the technology side of things. Taj, Anita, Demetrius, good to see you guys. Howard, glad you're able to join us today. Arthur, Will, Charles, Claire, and Michael from the UK. So yeah, we got a nice big full group here. Awesome. I love that. So why don't we get this thing rolling? And I've got everybody on mute. And the reason I do that is because I want to run this training like I do most trainings, which means that what we'll do is I will share a little bit of content, and then we'll take the opportunity to pause, get some feedback from you, ask you how it's important to you, how it's working for you, answer any questions that you have along the way. We'll use the chat box for that. I'll go through any of the chat questions that we have. And then if there's a kind of a bigger question, then I can take somebody off mute and we can kind of hash that out. And so after we do a little bit of a content dump, then what we'll do is switch over, do a little bit and answer some questions. Then we'll do a little bit more content. And then finally, we'll get you doing stuff because I want this to be a working session, not just Scott talks and you listen. Okay? Does that sound good? Awesome. So the 10-hour sales week, can everybody see my screen? First and foremost, you should see that 10-hour sales week, the 10-hour sales week. And so there's two worksheets that you should have had access to a little bit earlier. So I sent a Dropbox link out to everyone that was on the meeting invite. So you should be able to click and just download those worksheets and print those out and have those ready because we're going to work on those to actually get you doing stuff and start thinking about the process of building your own 10-hour sales week. So this is the first worksheet, build your 10-hour sales week. And then the second worksheet is a blank calendar, which will fill in after we've built our 10-hour sales week after the short bit of training that we're going to do here. So if you don't have these worksheets for whatever reason, that's okay too. You can just sketch this stuff out, do it by hand, and then transfer it over to your worksheet or transfer it over to your Google Calendar a little bit later. So without any further ado, let's do this. Let's talk about the 10-hour sales week. So why is this important? Why do we want to talk about the 10-hour sales week? Well, I think, of course, we're all there right now. I've been there. I am there every day as a startup CEO, as a founder of a company. So whether you're a startup CEO and you're trying to do sales on top of all of the other stuff you're doing, or you are a dedicated salesperson at a startup, there's still lots and lots of stuff that's happening every single day. There's lots of priorities. So even though you might be the salesperson at this team, there's probably a chance that you're doing a lot of other stuff too. You're doing marketing, you're doing recruiting, you're doing some product work, I'm sure. You've got meetings with engineers to help fix bugs and all of those things. So whether you are the startup CEO or the founder or the co-founder, or you're the salesperson, working at a startup means you have lots of things going on every single day. And we just all have too many distractions. There's too many things happening around us each and every day. And those distractions end up taking away from our dedicated sales time. And then what ends up happening is we do our sales stuff and we get busy. We work on busy stuff that takes a lot of time related to sales. And we say, oh, I must be doing sales. I must be making a lot of progress here. But it's not actually building the business. So busyness and business are two obviously very, very different things. And I think the biggest fear all of us have is that you kind of end up in purgatory. You end up in this phase where you can't just work harder to grow. You can do that to a certain point with your company, with your startup, even with your sales territory. You can just kind of grind, push, brute force your way to a certain amount of revenue or growth. There's got to be at some point, though, that you can't just add more hours to the day. I didn't get to it today, so I'm just going to work late tonight, or I didn't get to it this week, so I'm going to work over the weekend. There's only 2 days on the weekend to make up for 5 days of work that you're trying to do. And a lot of us, if you're like me, you have a family at home and you do like spending time with those people. So you want to get home and do that. And so what ends up happening, if we're not really careful, we can end up in kind of like never ending startup mode. We can end up in this idea of kind of sales purgatory where we've got some customers, we've got some revenue, but we're never actually growing and scaling to the point where we need to scale. And so I think what the opportunity here that we have is one, we want focus. We want to be able to say, this is my sales time and I'm going to be focusing on my sales stuff during that time, right? We want to be able to know that that time is my sales time. When I'm focused, I'm doing sales. I'm not checking email. I'm not checking my texts. I'm not worrying about product stuff. I'm not letting people interrupt me at my desk and saying, oh, I've got this bug that fixed that it's not working and I need your help. Like, sales time is dedicated. And we want to have a clear plan so that when we have that focus and we have that time, we want to know exactly what we're doing in the time that we've allocated to doing our sales. And ultimately, of course, what we need and what we want is customers and revenue. And so the only way to do that is to do some selling. And so the 10-hour sales week is designed to help you focus. It's designed to get you some dedicated sales time. It's designed to give you a plan so you can get those customers and you can get that revenue that you need so you can scale and grow your company. So what I'm going to do here is go through a couple key principles, then we'll pause and answer some questions that you might have about some of the topics that we're covering. And then, like I said, we'll dive into a little activity that will get you designing your 10-hour sales week. Okay? So cool. So the first principle here that we want to talk about is one small step. And what I mean by that, it's much better to do at least one small thing than to do nothing at all. I think a lot of times we get overwhelmed, especially on the sales side of things. Like, I got to be doing all of these things. I got to be doing my prospecting. I got to work on deals in the pipeline. I've got to prep for this meeting. I've got some customers that are already paying me and I've got to make sure that they're happy or they've got some questions. I've got to figure out a way to scale and grow. I've got to build some process around the sales thing, right? And so what ends up, if you're anything like me, you end up with kind of this idea of decision fatigue. You're not even sure what to do, so you end up doing nothing. And you're sort of like no better off. And so this is really a kind of a core concept of the 10-hour sales week, is that you can't necessarily solve all of your sales problems in 10 hours per week, but doing 10 hours a week is a hell of a lot better than doing 0 or doing 5 really poorly or doing 20, but doing those 20 really poorly. If we can focus you in a dedicated time with a really clear plan, then those 10 hours are 10 small steps that actually bring you much, much longer down the path on your journey to building and scaling your company. So it's really, really important to remember it's better to do something and do that something really well than to do nothing at all. And so just taking action is really a key, committing to that time and committing to taking that action. So first principle, take one small step, much better than doing nothing at all. The second is we want to measure output, not input. And this is the busyness versus business side of things. So I think a lot of times we get hung up on, well, I spent 4 hours on LinkedIn, or wow, I spent a whole 2-3 days at some conference, right? So therefore, because my input is really big, I must be doing the sales thing the right way. Well, input is not nearly as important as the output. And so what we want to do is make sure that when we are designing your plan and designing your work, that the focus that you're giving is more designed to give you better output than just looking at raw input. And so we'll talk through some strategies to make sure that you're spending the right amount of time on the right number of activities so that your output is really high relative to the input that you are putting in to those sales efforts. So the third thing we want to do is make sure that we're always scheduling time. So these are, if you're working on your own, these are meetings with yourself, your meetings with your company that you do not move. Just like you wouldn't move, for example, a product sprint meeting, or you wouldn't move a meeting with another colleague or an employee to do a performance review, or you wouldn't move a meeting with a potential investor. Like, if that meeting came on your calendar to meet and have coffee with a potential investor, and somebody else said, hey, could I meet with you at that time? You probably wouldn't call up the investor and say, yeah, you know what, I've got this other meeting I want to take. Sorry, I can't talk to you. You would definitely make sure that you did that meeting with that investor, right? So we got to do the same thing on the sales side. When we schedule that time, we got to keep that appointed time. It is our sales time. It's an appointment with ourselves. It's an appointment with our company. It's an appointment with our future customers, and scheduling that time, and do not move it no matter what. Okay? So scheduling that time and keeping to that time. Fourthly, you want to work in sprints. So I've asked, let me ask you kind of a question out there. Do any of you or any of your teams, especially on the product or engineering side, do you ever work in sprints? Do you ever use Scrum as a methodology for building product or working through engineering? So if you're using Scrum or you're using sprints, go ahead and type in the chat box or raise your hand or something just so I know. Yeah. So a lot of people raising their hand, saying yes in the chat box. Yeah, Taj, I know you and the team there are starting to use sprints on the selling side as well. And that's exactly what we want to do. We want to take that framework that we know works so well on the product engineering side and apply it to sales. So let me explain that in a little bit more detail. So a product sprint is designed to say, well, over a given week or a given 2-week period, we are going to work on these things. These are the tasks that we are assigning to ourselves and to our team to build the product or build the platform or work on bugs or whatever the outcome is over that week or 2-week period. And it's very well set ahead of time. We say, look, I know these are the tasks that are going into that sprint. We're going to work on those tasks throughout the sprint. And then at the end, we're going to see how well we did, which we'll get to in just a minute. And so if we apply that framework to the selling side of things, to the sales side of things, it turns out we can be really effective in just a really short period of time. So first of all, designing our work sprint, thinking of that week, that 10-hour sales week, is in a way, it's our sales sprint. If I only have 10 hours of time, how am I going to spend that time wisely? Just like you would in product and engineering, right? You know that certain tasks take a certain amount of time on the product and engineering side, and you're not going to ask the product team or the engineering team to do more than what's possible in the time that's allocated, whether it's a week or 2 weeks, right? So we want to do the same thing here. Let's focus in, figure out what the key tasks are. This is part of the focus and part of getting output, not input. Let's figure out what we can do over that given week in order to get the maximum amount of output for the input that we have available. And then further, for each individual day, if we're spending an hour on Monday doing our prospecting work, well, what are the key tasks within that prospecting period that we need to do in order to be effective in that time? So are we just saying, well, I guess this hour I'll work on prospecting. Where should I start? Right? That's not an effective way to use your time. Instead, you want to go in there with a plan and say, this hour, I'm going to be working on this task. I'm going to be working through this list of contacts that attended a webinar. I'm going to be setting up meetings for people that are going to that conference that I'll be attending in 2 weeks. Or, hey, these are some LinkedIn contacts that I have that I think might be able to help me out, either directly as customers or at least be able to introduce me or refer me. So let me just knock out 50 emails in the next hour and see if I can get any introductions, right? So we want to go in, work in sprints, not just on a planning basis over a given week over those 10 hours, but each individual day should be a daily work sprint as well. That means no email, no text. We're not focusing on anything else. We're not letting anybody else interrupt us during that work sprint. Just like the engineer puts on their headphones and says, I'm closed right now because I got to get this bug fix in, or I got to get this feature done, or I've got to make this fix to the platform. So it's the same idea. That's why we want to schedule the time, stick to it, and then focus in that time just like we would on the product or engineering side of things. And then that brings us to the fifth principle. It's doing a weekly retro. So you want to go back. It's easy for us, and I think if you're anything like me, it's like push, forward. And you kind of forget to say, okay, let's take 30 minutes. Let's go back and figure out what's working, what's not working. Did I stick to the time that I had allocated for sales? Did I do all of the prospecting work that I expected to do? Did I expect to get in touch with 150 people, but I only did 50, right? Why did I only get in touch with 50? Is it because it took me a lot longer to do the research before I could do the outreach? Or was there something else? Did I let myself get distracted that I thought, I was going to spend an hour on Monday doing prospecting, but turns out it was really only 20 minutes because I got interrupted halfway to get pulled into some other meeting or some other phone call that I really didn't need to or could have waited. So doing that weekly retro is just a way to keep us honest, just like, again, you would do on the product and engineering side. On the product and engineering sprints, at the end, they do a retro and say, hey, did we ask too much of the product and engineering team? Did we try to get them to do many things? What tasks and what bug fixes maybe we thought were going to be a 30-minute job turned out to be a 3-hour job or a 30-hour job once we dug into it, right? So doing that retro helps us to calibrate and fine-tune how we're going to set up our future work sprints and our future 10-hour work weeks or future 10-hour sales weeks. So it's just kind of a quick set of principles. I want to get into an example in just a minute, but I want to pause here to see if there's any questions. This idea of the 10-hour sales week, it's kind of inspired by Tim Ferriss. Does anybody out there know Tim Ferriss or read any of his stuff? He wrote a book initially called The 4-Hour Work Week. So Arthur is saying yes. He also wrote a book called The 4-Hour Body, and he wrote a book called The 4-Hour Chef. So the 4-Hour Work Week was all about how do you outsource your work so that you only work 4 hours a week and you can still run your business. The 4-Hour Chef was about how do you learn new skills with the minimum amount of effort. How do you kind of hack your way to becoming close to being an expert in any one particular field? In the case, he used the chef. How do I, in very, very short amount of time, learn how to be a high quality chef? And then the 4-hour body was, how do I work out if I have 4 hours a week, I think is it is. And so it's just a way of fine-tuning our process and really, really focusing in on those key activities and tasks that are most important in order to get the maximum amount of output for any given input. So what I want to do here is kind of give you a quick example of what I mean to kind of something that encapsulates a lot of these key principles in terms of focusing our time, scheduling that time, working in sprints, output more important than input. So give me just a second here, and I'm going to switch over and share a new screen with you. Okay. Almost there, folks. Looking. And actually, this is a work sprint, which will, you'll see, I know Howard is on the line, and Howard was kind of one of the subjects of this work sprint, though he didn't know it at the time. So, okay, I got it dialed up here. So let me share my screen here. Cool. Okay, so what you see on your screen is a spreadsheet that kind of looks like a bit of gobbledygook if you've never seen it before, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And so here's the project that I designed for myself. So I realized at the end of last year that I wasn't spending enough time proactively doing my prospecting work. So I'd talked to tons of people throughout the course of the year. I'd done a bunch of workshops. I'd done webinars. I had clients, and I was doing well with those. I was focusing in on them. When I looked at my own sales pipeline and I looked at kind of the flow and the number of conversations I was having with entrepreneurs like you, I realized I'm actually not doing enough proactive work. So how can I design for myself a type of sprint, or design for myself some prospecting activity that will be low input, high output, and it will allow me to focus in on a daily basis? And so what I did is design for myself what's called a LinkedIn connection project. So what you see on the screen here, this is back in November for about a week or two. What I did is I used this really cool tool that's available on LinkedIn. So if we go over to LinkedIn and click on Add Contacts, and from here, it asks you to enter your email address. And when you do that, now LinkedIn, what's doing is it's thinking, and it's looking in through my Gmail for all of the people that I have had some email communication with, but are not yet contacts, not yet connections of mine on LinkedIn. And so let's think about why this could be important. Well, I talk to a lot of people. I've emailed a lot of people. People that, like I said, come to webinars, people on my marketing list, people that I've met at conferences, whatever that is. Well, a lot of those folks are startup CEOs, startup founders, sales leaders at startup organizations. And so my thinking on this project, this sprint, if you will, was that, wow, if I've already interacted with these people in some way, shape, or form, but they're not customers, they're not clients, then that's an opportunity for me to very quickly see if they'd be willing to engage with me. And one of the low friction ways that I can look to engage with people, instead of emailing and saying, hey, do you want help with building your sales process and getting up your ramp to repeatability? Yeah, I could do that. Or I could take a much more kind of soft approach and simply say, hey, just realized that we weren't connected on LinkedIn. And so here is a list. So I've got 1,771 people that are in my email, people I've emailed with, that are not yet LinkedIn connections. That's a hell of a lot of people, even after doing this project back in November, right? And so you'll see they've got this snazzy little button where I could click this blue button that says Add Connections, and it will immediately blast 1,700 connection requests. Definitely don't recommend doing that. That's not my style. I know some people do it. Instead, what I want to do is selectively go through and find people that are startup CEOs, startup founders. So here's an example of this guy, Gabriel Gross, co-founder, president of RealBird. I actually remember Gabriel. He and I know each other from many, many, many years ago, back when I was at Altus Research. And we are not connected on LinkedIn, even though we've emailed with each other. And so what I did is I set up this project for myself. I said for 30 minutes every morning, what I'm going to do is find 10 of these people that are kind of my ideal client, my target client, and just send them a personalized LinkedIn connection request. And so what that does is if they accept my request, then it opens up an opportunity to communicate with them. Like, oh, hey Gabe, hey Gabriel, thanks so much for accepting my request. Just realize, how are things going at Realbird, right? Just seeing if they're willing to engage with me. And if they are, now I get into a conversation, which might lead to a lead, which might lead to a sales opportunity. And you can do the same thing, because if you think about your startup and the work that you've done, I'm sure you've emailed hundreds, if not thousands of people already, that whether it was part of your customer development process early on before you built your product, or it was people that you've just been emailing with, people you're introduced to, people that you found on LinkedIn and you sent them a LinkedIn connection request and then you started emailing with them, whatever that is, right? You probably have a lot of these people. Even if it's 100 people, that's an opportunity to re-engage. And so what I found was that there's a lot of these people, and you can see by my spreadsheet, I'm focusing mostly on CEOs, right? And I just kind of tracked this spreadsheet, and I was able to do 10 per day in a 30-minute sprint. And so I would just, find somebody to go, hey, Karen, I can't believe it's been so long since we met at the Lean Startup Conference 2 years ago. Just realized we weren't connected here on LinkedIn and thought we might send, right? It takes me about 3 minutes. Want to go to that, find that person from their name here, go to their LinkedIn profile, right? Just want to make sure, in this case, want to make sure that it's still kind of a valid connection, and then quickly personalize the note and then send, right? And so I did this for about 10 days in November, just before Thanksgiving. And so one of the people, I mentioned Howard a little bit earlier. So one of the people that was on this list is Howard. So Howard is works with Sidekick Health. And so Howard and I first met at a workshop I had done earlier that year. And so he was in my outbox. And because we had some email communication before the workshop and after the workshop, and I was sending resources and links to slides and all that good stuff. And I realized, wow, we hadn't connected. So I sent him a connection request, led to a conversation, and now I'm working with Howard and his team at Sidekick Health. So boom, right? So low amount of input, 30 minutes a day, high amount of output, ended up getting one new client. And that's just one example. I know there's a lot of other people in here where I've had other types of conversations with them, folks that at least I can, if anything, get them onto my marketing list so I can market to them over the longer run. But the whole idea here that I want to bring this back to is, let me go ahead and go back to the slides. Give me a second. The whole idea of what we're doing here is we just want to focus on how can I spend a small amount of time in order to get a high amount of output, and just really